Good evening, everybody, and a really warm welcome to the Fifth Estate here at the Wheeler Centre. My name is Sally Warhaft. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, to be here. The Wheeler Centre is celebrating its 15th birthday this year, and, well, it feels like yesterday. 15 years from now, we'll be in the middle of the centenary of the Second World War. And in some ways, even though I wasn't born, that feels like yesterday too. The institutions and the mores and the relationships that have underpinned international relations since the end of the Second World War have been shaken up like confetti. In 1941, our Prime Minister, John Curtin, gave a speech where he said, "With some courage, without any inhibitions of any kind, I make it quite clear that Australia looks to America, free of any pangs as to our traditional links or kinship with the United Kingdom." The speech was titled "The Task Ahead." And tonight, in some ways, even though we're not at war, we're going to be asking, what's our task now in Australia in our relationship with America? And we're so fortunate to have these two wonderful guests. Kim Hoggard is a former US government official who worked for President Ronald Reagan as Assistant Press Secretary from 1981 to 1985, and in his second administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Public Affairs. From 1989 to 91, she was Senior Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs under Secretary of State James Baker in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. In other words, she's somebody who has worked at the highest levels of American government. Bruce Wolpe, who's a bit of a friend of the Fifth Estate, I think we can say.
Yes.
Senior non-resident fellow at the US Studies Centre and a well-known commentator on US politics. He's worked with the Democrats in Congress during Obama's first term, and he was a senior advisor and chief of staff to Prime Minister Julia Gillard. He's also the author of 3 books, and we're very lucky we've got the Chestnut Tree Bookshop selling Bruce's books this evening, including Lobbying Congress, How the System Works, and What Trump's Second Term Means for Australia. And hard to believe, but Bruce was at Kennedy's inauguration. Please give them a big welcome. They were rather lengthier bios than I usually give. I usually edit them like mad, but I thought it's really important the context of why you two are here and here together tonight. And before we get into Australia, I want to hear from Kim just a bit about your experience working for Presidents Reagan and Bush.
Well, thank you, Sally, and thank you for having me, and good evening, everybody. Well, it was an incredible experience, of course. They're jobs that are high intensity and a lot of pressure. But I was working at a time when President Reagan, for instance, who was seen as a bit of a cowboy, and there was a lot of concern during the campaign from European capitals and American capitals that, you know, he would be one step away from pushing the nuclear button. And of course, he dropped one bomb on Libya and made a little incursion into Grenada to save some medical students. So, you know, he was completely opposite of what was the expectation. And he was the kind of person, whether you agreed with his policies, and you can debate economic policies and defense policies, but he was the kind of person that he was genuine, and he was a delight to be around. And of course, George H.W. Bush had an incredible amount of experience, a former World War II fighter pilot, an ambassador, an elected official in Congress, and he a representative at the UN, and of course vice president to Ronald Reagan for 2 terms. So a man with an incredible amount of experience, and when it came time for him, when he took office, we saw such a change in the global order with the fall of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall coming down, the Iron Curtain opening up, apartheid ending in South Africa, and we were managing all of that change, and he was the right president for that job. And there was a lot of hope. All the work that Reagan had done as an anti-nuclear president and to negotiate significant nuclear weapons reductions that were realized in the H.W. Bush administration were quite significant and eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapon and reduced quite a lot of the arsenal. So, you know, at that time there was a lot of hope of what could transpire for the country and the world.
And what's your sense when you're looking at the Trump administration now? Is there anything you recognise?
No, it's a complete contrast in tone and style and policy. And, you know, on the one hand, one is a ruler, the other two governed. And this one, current occupant of the Oval Office, with a huge portrait of Ronald Reagan hanging on the wall, as if that gives him some sort of divine right, doesn't have the same sort of respect for the office and what it means in terms of, or the White House. I mean, we're seeing all the redecoration going on and the gilding and the gold and the extravagant decoration over ornamentation, but it really doesn't show the respect that the White House is the people's house. It's the home of democracy, and it's not, doesn't belong to the current occupant, really. The current occupant is representing the people. And so the contrasts are completely different. The president now, Donald Trump, seems to consider himself to be the CEO of the country, and he sees the country as a brand, and a brand that people should pay money to be involved with. And that's completely opposite from how both Reagan and Bush and other presidents have handled their time in the office. They respected it. They respected the rule of law. They respected that it was a democracy, that they were there because of the people, and they were president for all Americans, not just some. And they handled their time there in a way that was positive, that made people feel positive about the country. Yeah. And we don't get that now. We have a man who thinks, you know, he wants to be a strong man, but at the same time, he wants the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, wants to be a king. And yeah, there's gold plating all around that Reagan portrait. And I tell you, I kind of miss Ronald Reagan.
I think a lot of people do.
Oh, there are people that miss George W. Bush.
And H.W. Bush, absolutely.
Again, before we get to Australia, I want to get a little more from each of you about where each of the parties are at right now, because we talk a lot about Trump, less, I think, about the Republican Party. But let's start with the Democrats and how you think their resistance efforts, I suppose, are going, Bruce.
Terribly. The Democrats, I think, are flat on their back, and they're angry as hell, and they can't fathom how they got into this position of weakness. I mean, it was one thing for Trump to win the presidency, but the bigger catastrophe as far as governance are concerned, and the American Constitution is based on checks and balances and three co-equal branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, and Trump is dominant. The other two are also flat on their backs. There are no checks anymore. And Trump has iron rule over his party, over the Congress, and we've seen the courts hesitant to say, thou shalt not. There's one case coming up, news today. Supreme Court is going to hear the tariff case. I'm not a lawyer, thank goodness, but I've read the underlying statute and the judgments to date. Trump's tariffs can't be found in the text of the law he's relying on to impose them. So if the Supreme Court does its job, it'll say, thou shalt not. If they don't do their job, as has been the case so far, it'll be, okay, we'll figure out a way that you can do this. But if they say you can't impose these tariffs, then the question is going to be for the president, will you be the first, is Trump going to be the first president to disobey an order of the Supreme Court? And the answer to that question, therein lies the future of American democracy. So we will see. But the Democrats, by not taking control of the House of Representatives, means that there is no oversight. It's just like the House of Representatives here. You're the majority party, you control the House, therefore you control the committees. The committees have jurisdiction over every department of government. You can hold hearings, you can have inquiries, you can have subpoenas, you can have witnesses, and you can set the agenda on the House floor as to what you're working with. It would also mean that no Trump legislation would pass the House, straight party line vote, if you control the House. So the Trump's legislative program would come to an end. So Trump has succeeded. I'd like to say there are 6 words that describe Trump today: in command and out of control. And that is exactly what he's doing, and he's gotten his agenda through. So the Democrats are saying, this is happening to us. The country's going to hell. What are you doing, you Democrats in Washington? And it's so bad that the majority leaders, the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate don't have the wherewithal to get together every morning at 10 a.m. and hold a joint press conference and say, this is the atrocity that he committed last night at 4:35 in the morning, and this is what we're going to do about it. And effectively what you don't have, but you do have under the Westminster system, is an opposition leader. There is no opposition leader, so the opposition can't gel. Susan Lee has more power than all the Democrats in Washington as far as getting a voice heard as an alternative to the government. So they know that the only check that can come really on Trump in the foreseeable future is the midterm elections for the House and the Senate next year. If the Democrats cannot take back either the House or the Senate, then Trump's rule will be absolutely absolute, and there will be nothing stopping him for the duration of his term. I thought I'd lift the mood a little
Kim,
bit. You know?
what about the Republicans? They look, when somebody's won and you've got the power, it's hard to see what's going on under the surface, and it seems like the Republicans are holding together their various factions quite well. But how do you read it?
Well, let me just clarify for the audience that I'm not a Republican, just so I don't speak for the Republican Party. But I would say that there is no Republican Party. There is the Trump Party. The Republican Party, as we knew it in the Reagan and Bush days, just really is a shadow of itself. But I would just go back and say, on the political parties themselves, they've lost an awful lot of influence over time, over the last decades. You know, they with the change in the way elections work, with the amount of money involved. You know, it used to be that we used to have these backroom,
cigar smoking
people in charge who decided who was going to run, who the candidate was, what the messaging was going to be, what the policies were going to be. And the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, the Republican National Committee had a lot of power. They did all the fundraising. But not anymore. You know, that's really been turned over to political strategists and influencers. And the money that's raised now with the Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, which recognized businesses and corporations as individuals and people so that they could make enormous contributions to the electoral process and campaigns. So these super PACs and these political strategists and these influencers are really determining how these parties, such as they are, a shell of themselves, actually operate. They really have the power. And you can see it in the infighting that the Democratic National Committee has had over the last few years. The Republican committee just does whatever Trump tells it to do. But most of the money that was raised in the last campaign, like $16 billion, I think I read that $500 million went to the DNC. So all that other money is going to other super PACs who are doing the commercials and running the show, really. So there's a lot of the party machine apparatus doesn't really function well for either party to begin with. And this influence from outside, whether it's the Joe Rogans or wealthy donors, tech, Silicon Valley, that's had a huge influence. In terms of the Republican Party, they lost their way a long time ago. We had, Tea Party, Freedom Caucus, there's lots of factions, and they've now sort of developed with Trump, with, of course, MAGA influence is the dominant influence in the Republican Party. And that consists of, J.D. Vance and people like Steve Bannon, who are anti-immigration and who are isolationists. And then you have traditional Republicans like the leader of the Senate, John Thune, or Lindsey Graham, who are more pro-immigration, certainly pro-alliances and pro-NATO, but just want smaller government. And then you have the religious right, who helped Trump get elected in 2020, don't have quite as much influence this time around because Trump was able to expand his base in 2024 to include young voters and black male voters. But they're still getting what they want in terms of Medicaid cuts to abortion providers and that sort of thing. And then, you have the more Silicon Valley libertarian part of the party, which, of course, are people like Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel, who want less regulation or no regulation on tech, on AI, on cryptocurrency. And a lot of these factions do kind of step on each other occasionally. Like I said about anti-immigration, well, that may be Vance, but it's not necessarily the traditional Republicans, or it's not necessarily the Silicon Valley types because they want the skilled migrants. So, there's a lot of tugging, and Trump keeps them together. But whether he can once he's gone, whether J.D. Vance can do it, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the issue. The thing that unites the Republican Party right now is fear. They're scared to death. Trump can end your political career with one post on Truth Social, and he's done that, and they know he's done it. And so therefore, none of the Republicans, when it comes down to, is my vote going to defeat a nominee or a piece of legislation that Trump wants, no Republican is willing to be that vote, and so the things pass and the nominees are appointed. On the Democrats, just very briefly, two strands here. One was we lost the culture wars. Trump won the culture wars. We're going to be against people of color. We're going to be against immigrants, all sorts of things like that. And we actually need to be more populist in order to have a whole bunch of motivated people around the country. Look at the New York City mayor's race. Now, New York City is not the country, but I'm saying where the Democrats have a choice, they're moving left, and they feel a wave beneath their feet to do that. So those two trends are going to come out.
So into all of this, every country has to tread a path of negotiation and a path like we've never seen before. The Australia-America relationship was an alliance that was built primarily on shared values. We go back to the John Curtin speech and the years in between. I want us to circle towards the question, is it worth it? From a defence and security and economic point of view, but we'll get to that. First, though, and you first, Bruce, that the main game, you write about this in your book, is the relationship between Trump and Albanese.
Yes.
It's between the leaders. They had a recent phone call. Of course, it was described as warm and cordial. I just can't for the life of me imagine what these two men have to talk about. I can't imagine that Albanese is somebody Trump would respect at all.
Yeah, but he'll let whatever Trump wants to talk about, that's what Albanese wants to talk about.
So, and I say that about Albanese because I think there is a sort of gentleness to his persona, to his being that Trump just wouldn't seem to like. But Bruce, how do you think that relationship is going, and where does it need to go?
I mean, in one sense, the relationship is okay. I know everyone in the media says, when is this personal meeting going to happen, and so forth and so on.
I don't know why they want it. Why would you be asking for it?
Yes, and why do you want to ask for a meeting? It's going to end up in the Oval Office, and then for 10 minutes you say something with Trump, and then the press is there and they talk about Jeffrey Epstein.
If you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it's going to be some sort of ritual humiliation.
I'd like to know the PM's position on Jeffrey Epstein. That's what I'd like to know. Albanese, without the benefit of that meeting, the fact is, in the trade wars, which are in fact a disgrace to Australia, what Trump has done is rip up the free trade agreement. They just canceled E3 visas under the program, which is Australians who want to work in professional capacity in the United States get a visa. And no other country had it because no other country had such a great relationship with the United States. And Australia has a trade deficit with the United States. The United States has a surplus with Australia. Trump is punishing the world because the United States is taken advantage of, and the U.S. is in a trade deficit with every country, but not Australia. But Australia still gets a tariff because of what it is outrageous. So that little insult, if we can speak French for a moment, aside, what they have to deal with is, well, out of what has happened so far, Australia's gotten treated better than almost any other country. A 10% tariff instead of 25 or 50 or 150. And Australia hasn't been punished that much. But there are going to be several questions. Okay, what else are you going to do to me on trade? I want to know that. I also want to know, what are you going to do about China? What is your view? Do you want to go to war on Taiwan? And they'll talk about AUKUS and benchmarks in that. Are there alternatives to it? What does Trump want? Does he want more money from Australia? Does he want less technology to come to Australia? Does he want the ships to be built more in the United States? That sort of thing. But really, I think it's very important for Albanese to come away from that meeting with a clear understanding of what Trump is going to do on China, because that will define the region.
I absolutely think it's something that Australians need to think about in terms of shared values. This is, as somebody who did work in diplomacy, shared values between countries are what hold them together. They're so important. And whenever we had meetings, we often talked about and emphasized those shared values. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what are our shared values with the United States? As Bruce just pointed out, President Trump doesn't seem to think that treaties mean anything. He just disregards them, ignores them, gets out of them, whether it's the Paris Climate Accords or whether it's the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement, which under that agreement allowed the visas.
That's right.
For Australian workers, skilled workers, to go work pretty unencumbered in the United States, which was a great deal for the United States, getting brilliant Australian talent. But also the shared values around alliances. President Trump has threatened, to get out of NATO. He's doesn't appreciate or respect the alliances with the Europeans or any other country that the U.S. has established such good relationships with over a long, long time, and a lot of hard work by diplomats and previous politicians. He doesn't seem to have respect domestically for his own people. He doesn't respect the rule of law, the Constitution, a notion of free and fair elections. There's so many things we could list that we'd have to say, do we have any shared values? And I think it's a legitimate question for Australians to ask, and for Australian leaders to consider when we think about issues like AUKUS, or when we think about issues like tariffs. We have to think, what are our national security interests? Where do our national security interests lie? We've got American troops on bases here in Australia now. Are they there for our interests, or are they there for U.S. interests? They're far away. That's a launching pad for the U.S. in the case of a threat from China. Are they really there for us? And I personally, I just have to put my cards on the table. I've not been a supporter of a wholehearted supporter of AUKUS from the beginning, because I feel like that was something that occurred to Australia. It was not discussed publicly with Australians. The two parties decided that's what's going to be the policy, and that there was a lot of concern about security and panic amongst the Australian government and Australian parties about our security, because we have been so reliant on the US nuclear umbrella for our security. But I really think that Albanese made the right move when we talk about whether he should have had a meeting with Donald Trump by now. He did the right thing going to China first, because our relationship with China is really important. We're in the region. They have our 1/3 of our exports go to China. So China, for Australia, it's in our economic national interest to make sure we maintain a healthy relationship with China. And I commend him for going and spending 6 days there and not worrying about whether he's sitting under the Klieg lights in the gilt-adorned Oval Office, taking the heat, because we have a negotiated PBS to negotiate prescription prices so that people can stay healthy in this country. So I think we definitely need to be questioning our government about what are we going to do now that we have an unreliable ally in the United States now.
Who acts to punish America's friends first. I mean, look at South Korea. Look at what's happened. Look at Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he has, and he's not. Look at where Putin is. Look at where Netanyahu is. And this is how Trump practices.
And do we want to tie
diplomacy
ourselves
to that?
Yeah.
And just a larger context, very briefly, two things have changed since Trump became president. First, America is no longer the leader of the free world because the free world is no longer following America. And second, he's dismantled the economic and trade architecture that existed since World War II. And in going into this conversation, with Australia, with the United States, what's just absolutely important to understand is Australia hasn't changed. The United States has changed. And that is a big deal.
How do you think, Bruce, the Albanese government's responded? How would you rate it so far?
Measured. I mean, rational. I think the closest parallel could be ultimately Canada, depending on what Trump does. I mean, Mark Carney has said their relationship with the United States is over. And that is pretty profound. And I think if Trump punches Australia a couple more times on trade issues like the PBS, I think there's a shift in the mood in this country. Polls show people not happy that Trump was elected. They don't show confidence in his leadership. But if Trump does a couple of other nasty things to Australia, then I think the politics shift, and I think that actually changes the government's position as to what posture to take with the United States. But I guess my point is it's reactive. I'd like this government to be proactive and outline, these are our values. This is what we want. This is what we want to do in the region for Australia's national interests. This is what we would like to do with the United States, and put it on them instead of us always taking it and then figuring out what to do about it.
I'd just like to add to that. In the dealings that I had when I was in those positions, and we had the pleasure of meeting a lot of Australian politicians and diplomats. And every time I met, because just to let the audience know, I'm married to a wonderful Australian.
Me too.
Who
I'm not.
who's a journalist. And so I would be invited because my colleagues knew that I was married to an Australian. So whenever we had Australian meetings, I got invited to go to the meetings. But, and these were with Hawke and Keating and Kim Beazley and so that era of leadership in the country. And everyone would come up to me later and say, the Americans would come up to me later and say, God, those Australians, they're so arrogant. They're just so arrogant. But then they'd turn around and say, but damn, they know their brief. You know, that they were very impressive. They were always so impressive. And they were not arrogant in a,
No.
I don't mean to disparage the British, but not in that kind of way. They were kind of just in that cocky Australian way. And they just didn't, they weren't overawed by whether they were sitting with the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State or the President of the United States. They just, you know, plain speaking, but on top of their brief. Very impressive people. Yeah. And I think that has always been a feeling because Australia has such deep contacts with the State Department and the Pentagon, and they you know, Americans really understand what a good ally Australia has been. Everybody 2 layers underneath Trump understand that.
Yes, they do. All the agencies, the Pentagon, and both parts bipartisan in both the House and the Senate. It's rock solid.
But I would just say that now for Australia in dealing, and for Albanese dealing with this administration, on the one hand, you want to say keep calm and carry on, don't panic. But on the other hand, I agree with Bruce. We have to be proactive, and we have to back ourselves. We have to say, this is what we do well, and we can show you how to do it well if you would care to listen, whether it's on the PBS or having an independent Australian Electoral Commission or having universal mandatory voting. You know, lots of things that Australia does really, really well that we can be proud of and that we should sell and talk up. But in America, I think about this moment. There was an expression that the Chinese used in describing capitalism in that country, and it was that it was capitalism with Chinese characteristics, meaning, you know, the state control of a lot of what was happening. But now I look at America and I think, okay, it's democracy with American characteristics now, and they're not positive. The characteristics, because he's attacking his own people. He's bringing, he wants to take troops, U.S. troops out of bases in South Korea and Germany and other places, critically positioned strategic places, and instead put them on the streets of the cities of the United States of America. So when I say unique American characteristics, I don't mean that in a positive way anymore.
Yeah. Don't let our accents fool you. We're really Australian.
All of this that we're talking about is, of course, also happening at a time of world instability that is, I mean, I think many people are feeling in their bones that the world is just very, very different, and it feels very dangerous. And we have things like the photo, was it last week, where you've got, you know, Russia, North Korea, China. It looked like a new axis to me. It looked like a... where does this changing world power, what are these powers talking about, as much as you could tell? I mean, Kim, you've been in these, you know, high up in these administrations. What would they, the people a level or two down perhaps, or Trump and, you know, that level, be looking at that and Australia? What are they seeing?
Yeah, what would Jim Baker be thinking right now?
Yeah.
Well, Jim Baker was one of the greatest secretaries of state ever, I have to say. He would be pissed off, I think. He had a line when he first became Secretary of State under George H.W. Bush, and one of the things most secretaries of state do repeatedly since Kissinger, they'd go down to Israel, the first thing, just to pay homage to Israel, show American support for Israel. But Jim Baker was a lawyer, pragmatist, a guy who politically minded, who believed that you had a certain window to achieve things, and he was going to tackle the things that could be achieved. And peace talks in the Middle East was not going to be one of them, because he knew that wasn't going to happen. And at that stage, there was a lot of argy-bargy with Israel. And he didn't make a trip, and he was up on the Capitol Hill. Probably you were there. Testifying,
yeah.
and was asked by some senator or congressman, why haven't you gone to Israel? And he said, well, when Israel's ready for peace, they can call 456-1414, which is the White House switchboard number. And in other words, I'm ready to act, but let's hear from them first before we start. And he went off to tackle other things. So it wasn't until after the first Gulf War in the George H.W. Bush administration that opened the door after that, after the removal of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, that peace talks did start to happen. And they were quite successful. And it turned out later at Oslo Accords, sort of things kind of fell through, but it really helped establish a platform for peace talks to continue. Of course, they didn't achieve at the end of the day what they wanted to achieve. But I think, you know, so much of what happens at that level, people spend their lives working on these issues and are experts, whether it's Bill Burns, who was the CIA director under Biden, but was at my time at the State Department, one of the lead negotiators, Dennis Ross, who was a Democrat who Jim Baker hired because he understood the Middle East and was a Soviet expert as well. Yeah. So there are definite plans, goals, and achievements that people want to reach, but sometimes a president can only achieve so much. And there's so much going on in the world trying to manage everything that's happening. A lot of things are reactive and not proactive. And in the case of this president, I think that he sees the world completely differently from previous American presidents. He doesn't see it as one with U.S. and Western hegemony, or U.S. as a superpower, the superpower. I think he sees it as regional powers. I think he's ready to concede that there's going to be China, Russia, and the U.S. in their regions in charge, and that he's prepared to leave the world that way, and to recognize that that's the way it's going to be. And I don't think he cares about Ukraine, whether Ukraine loses land. Don't think he thinks, I'm not sure what he thinks about Taiwan. I'm not sure.
So that it's not worth going to war for.
I don't think he wants war, but he certainly doesn't know how to achieve the goals that are in the best interests of democratically led countries. I don't think so.
And so Trump is not, democracy is not what he champions. He champions power. He craves power, respects power. And I think at just stepping back, what is the world that we're in where this is unfolding, which you said is unfolding? Well, I'm not old enough, but it sure feels like the 1930s, where you have nativism and hostility to immigrants. You have the biggest trade wars in history. The tariffs today in the United States are bigger than Smoot-Hawley in the early 1930s. And you have authoritarians who feel empowered that they can take land from other countries. And this is happening. And we know how that decade ended. And today I mentioned the drones, you know, Russia had, Trump has phone calls with Putin. What does Putin do? He ramps up the war in Ukraine, and drones are over Poland this morning. Well, that's just half a step away from a missile counterstrike by NATO against those drones and other things. And then where the hell are we? So again, I don't want to scare the horses, but this is a pretty tenuous moment.
It's very tenuous, and I mean, Donald Trump's proven that he's happy to drop B-52 bombs on
Iran.
And on suspected drug carriers.
Yes, on suspected drug carriers, alleged. So in and out operations, because that makes him look like a strong man. I mean, it's really, really handy to have a military like the United States military behind you to make you look good.
You can do that.
And make you look decisive. But
He said last week, I'm the president, I can do whatever I want. And before Trump, that boat with drugs and people would have been intercepted by the Coast Guard, and you arrest them and you take them and you have a due process, and then you do what you want to do with them. Not here. This was an outright fatal attack.
yeah, and I think I don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but I am a bit pessimistic about the United States, because I think in this age that we live in, which is an age of disinformation, unregulated social media, unregulated internet, and now at the advent of AI, and America and other countries, including Australia, have had a lot of cyber attacks. America definitely had election interference, no matter what Donald Trump says about 2016 and 2020. There was definitely election interference. And we've had a lot of bad actor activity, which I think has helped in the demise of the U.S. Unity in the country. I think Russia and China have both done a lot of work to help feed the disinformation and the right-wing, far right-wing episodes, or the development of the far right being so emboldened to come out and show their faces, as they have here in Melbourne recently, with the neo-Nazis just feeling quite comfortable with their face on the camera. And we know in America's case that Russia was feeding and paying right-wing radio broadcasters. And now Trump has, of course, cut Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, the voices of democracy in these countries. So he's really ceding a lot of America's power and soft power to Russia and China, and that doesn't look good for the future. But I will say, and just remind everybody, that at the end of the day, power is temporary, and he's there temporarily, and we may have to endure it for another 3 years, but it is temporary. And how this unfolds after Trump is the big question.
Yeah, we have a little comic relief coming up.
No, you know, look, none of us like doom and gloom. I don't like doom and gloom
I like gloom
either.
and doom.
But you know, we need to say it. I mean, I think that's part of the problem in communications too, is that we always have to. You know, we're not about to end, we've got a bit to go, but, you know, you want to end it on a good note. Like the ABC News, they have the little puppy at the end or something, you know, we can forget it. But actually,
let me give you something better.
I think it's potentially a problem that if you think that the world is looking like the 1930s, and I happen to agree with you, Bruce, I think that there's so many things there that are, then you have to say it.
I think we have to apprehend the world that we're in, but I also think that we have strengths in this country that the United States right now doesn't have and needs to recover. And so you mentioned Nazis in Melbourne. They were also marching in Trump's first term. They were on the steps of Parliament House up here on Spring Street. And why? There's a huge echo chamber, and so people are empowered around the world, and so some Australians pick it up. But if you think about the two democracies, this democracy is infinitely stronger. You can't have someone like Trump become prime minister. The prime minister is the leader of the majority party in the House of Representatives. So there's no blow-in who can just come into a campaign and become prime minister. So Clive Palmer will never be prime minister. Twiggy Forrest will never be prime minister. Pauline Hanson will never be prime minister. Second, you have a Australian Electoral Commission and compulsory voting and preferential voting. And so elections will always land center-left and center-right. It will never, extremists can't take over. In America, extremists vote more because it's not compulsory voting, so proportionally, extreme voices are heard more at the ballot box than here in Australia.
I don't want to be doom and gloom, Bruce, but, you know, those things are not in our constitution. You only need a vote, you know, to take away that compulsory voting.
But I'm saying no one's going to be elected prime minister as extreme as Trump who will do that. because they can't just blow in and do that. There are protections. You don't have, there's a big fight over how the lines are drawn in districts in the House of Representatives for control of the House. So Texas just reapportioned its delegation in Congress to getting rid of 5 Democratic seats, countered by Gavin Newsom, my good friend Gavin Newsom. Gavin, I know you like me. To do the same in California and other states are doing it. Here at the AEC, there is no gerrymandering of seats in this, so it can't be skewed politically. Everything is hardball politics in the United States. It's not the case here. So Australians should be justifiably proud of the democracy you have, and know with confidence that we can face the world because we know what our country is all about.
When Barack Obama first visited Australia, as he was leaving on the aeroplane, a journalist, I think, asked him, "What would you like to take home from Australia? Do you want the sunshine?" And he said, "No, I want the compulsory voting."
Yes.
Whilst that all these things you say are true, I would argue, and I'd like you to both respond, that Australia is just not match fit domestically for the world that we find ourselves in. And our every area of life, whilst we have some guardrails, as they would say in America, we still depend on mining and housing for our wealth. Our education system is not great. It's far from great. We have all sorts of skill shortages, and there's no sense that this is a country that's got its eyes open to what's going on in the world at the moment and is getting ready for whatever might come. Do you see that, Kim?
Yeah, I think the whole world, every country is really facing these enormous obstacles and challenges. And of course, we have climate change to deal with too. And this is, from my experience, this is where leadership is so important. Even in the time that I was at the White House, and you could say it was, we thought it was frenetic, what was going on, but when you compare it to now, it's quite calm. But Reagan still felt a need to talk to the American people. Now, he got a lot of criticism for not doing enough press conferences or sitting down and doing interviews. Well, he did quite a few, but you can never satisfy the media completely.
He was like
on that
FDR.
stuff.
He had his weekly radio broadcast.
He had a weekly radio broadcast. Right. I was going to mention that, and it's so old-fashioned. But he started out as a radio broadcaster. He used to be a sportscaster, and he would call a game sitting in one state when the game was happening in another state, and he wasn't watching it. He'd get the ticker coming through, and he'd have to describe it. And he'd just go on with this colorful language about so-and-so is up at first base, and he's about to steal. Oh, no, he's not going to steal. And oh, maybe he's trying to, he'd just make it up. But he would just color it. So he loved radio. He loved the format of radio. And so when he came into office, he said, I want to do a weekly radio address. And of course, everyone just laughed at him and like, this is just not what you do anymore. This is the 80s. We don't do radio broadcasts. But every Saturday, he would sit down and he'd do a 5 or 10 minute little thing on the radio, just talk about what he wanted to talk about that week. Whether it was something he did or achieved or what he was planning on doing. He just wanted to communicate with the American people without the lens of the media to interpret it. And he did that throughout his presidency, and he really enjoyed it. And when you go back and look at some of them, his warmth really came through. And I just think that personal connection was important for him as a president. And after having had the assassination attempt, Nancy was like, "No, you're not going out there." So it did limit him somewhat in terms of the rope line and shaking hands, and having to wear bulletproof vests when he hated it. So that gave him a chance to reconnect. And I really think what we need in this day and age now, with all the noise that goes on, we need just a leader to be out there all the time. I would have liked to have seen the Prime Minister right after those rallies, the same day. Other people came out, but he should have been out there. And this is a time where we need the person that we've elected to the highest office, elected office, to be making, giving us some kind of direction about what's happening and some hopefulness about how we need facts on immigration. Just come out and say, these are the facts on immigration. You don't get your facts from an influencer, please. Get your facts from an authoritative source. And they need to be countering a lot of this disinformation, and this needs to be happening in the United States too, and the media are picking it up. But people aren't reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post, who are really, surprise, surprise, Wall Street Journal, but they are really covering Trump really well. And I would commend you to read them because they are on top of what the administration is doing, particularly economically. But we need our leaders now to be speaking regularly to us about what this country stands for, what our values are, and what we're tackling and what we're trying to achieve. I think the Prime Minister is an empathetic person, but I think his communication skills could be improved.
Well, just that rally you mentioned, it was late, but it was also sounded like a weird dog whistle back to Charlottesville, didn't it? It was a strange response. Bruce, what did you want to...
No, I agree. Leadership is the key value and word that we need here. And Trump is leading. We don't like it, but he is absolutely leading. And also in media management terms, just very briefly, he's doing something, it's an old gridiron expression called flooding the zone. And what he does is create so much news that you can't absorb it all and you can't counter it all. And you see, even in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, President Trump said today, without evidence, and somehow that's a rebuttal to what he said. And it used to be, in your day at the White House, it was one major story in every 24-hour news cycles. Trump has created 24 one-hour cycles, and he dominates every single one of them. He's on television or platform or streaming or whatever 3 to 4 hours a day. He has a cabinet meeting. The cameras are invited in. All the cabinet goes around. It's very similar to the tech dinner that occurred last Thursday, where they just say, "Thank you, Mr. President, for making what we're doing possible. Thank you." And after that, the press is there and they ask questions. The cabinet meeting last week went for 3 hours. And then he signs executive orders and he holds them up, including an Epstein picture. No, and then the journalists ask him questions. He gets on a plane. Before he gets on the plane, they ask him questions. He gets off the plane. They ask him questions. He goes to the tennis. They ask him questions. In other words, he sucks all the oxygen out of the country, and that gives him a preeminent position. Now, I think he's a unique figure with unique abilities in the command that he has over these things. But the way to be back is for leaders to stand up and articulate for the country where we're going and why we're going there and what we're going to accomplish, and to deal with the issues that you're saying, that, we have to be match fit. Well, this is how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see Jonathan Swan interview the president again. He was the only one that challenged him appropriately. And unfortunately, Trump this time around occasionally he sits down with a journalist. But what you're describing, the rope line kind of interviews where there's just the shouted questions, or he sits in the Oval Office and pontificates for an hour, or a cabinet meeting for 3 hours, it's not challenging him. No. So no one's coming back and saying, no, you're completely wrong on these numbers. Where are you getting these numbers? This is fake news. No one's coming back to him and challenging him. And that's the frustrating thing for me to watch from the media. The media's reporting it all over the place, but no one's putting him on the spot in real time and watching it. And then, people are in their own universes in terms of media usage. So they're either watching right-wing media, reading right-wing media, and not paying attention to ones who are dissecting what's happening.
All things being said, and they're all on the table and so forth. And when I was talking about the midterms and accountability and so forth, it still is the economy and that can trump everything. And if what he's doing with tariffs and what it means for inflation, whether the country goes to stagflation, where interest rates are going to be and so forth, if the economy is not working for the people who voted for him a year ago, then the Republicans are in trouble. And that will be the biggest driver of the election outcome.
Yes, and if people get out and vote. Now, midterm elections, people tend not to get out to vote.
Actually, that's a good thing because Trump is not on the ballot. When he's on the ballot, the turnout increases. So actually, agitated Democrats who really want to level the field, they may have a wave could come their way.
Look, even if there was a tsunami came their way, and let's say
Swallowed them up,
the
and that was
second
it.
coming of an Obama came their way, and everything just fell into place, and oh my goodness, the Democrats win next time. Even then,
Yes.
America is not just Trump, is it? America,
No.
I mean, I can't say if America's changed. I'm not American. I think the way Australians view America has deeply changed. And even with all those things, it would never go back to the way it was. That status quo that everybody thought after the first term of Trump that it would go, that Biden would bring it back to a status quo. And I think the second election of Trump has shown that that's just not going to be possible anymore. So what does that mean? What does it mean for a country like Australia when we looked towards this great power?
Well, it means that Australia can stand up and not play second fiddle and not feel like the wingman. Australia can stand up and say, no, we're getting it right here. There are things that we need to improve, absolutely. And we're all going through the affordability crisis, housing crisis. Our healthcare system needs bolstering. Our education system and public schooling needs adequate funding. And we need research and development, and we need to reduce the cost of university education. Because one of the best things I used to brag to my American friends about was how cheap it was to send our kids to university here and get a good university education, an excellent university education, and how much they are paying over there and how in debt young people are. And it is wrong to start our young people in life, in adulthood, in debt. That is a big mistake. And I really hope that somehow we can come around to finding ways to reinvesting in our universities in this country and in public education. That's the one big concern for me. But I think in a hopeful sense about America, it has so many obstacles in its election infrastructure that Bruce has outlined, Electoral College being the #1 obstacle to creating a democracy that actually represents the majority of the people. And how America fixes that, it's just not going to happen overnight. The constitutional referendums that have to be held, the way the Supreme Court is set up, it's just not going to happen. So I would like to see in America people talking about what Australia does in terms of universal voting, and we can't call it mandatory voting because over there that would be seen as assaulting their freedom.
I'll blow your
You
head
can't
off.
use the word mandatory. So universal voting, and they are writing about it, they're talking about it. And the hopeful thing is that in a lot of states in America, they are doing at lower level elections, state and local level, ranked choice voting. That is happening in some places. And there are some states, and mainly they're blue, but they are creating, like they did in California, independent mechanisms for devising the districts. So there's no gerrymandering. And this is why Gavin Newsom has to pass now legislation to undo the good legislation he did to not gerrymander, to now be able to gerrymander, to try to counter the seats that the gerrymandering's doing in Texas to get more seats for Trump, because Trump is worried he's going to lose the midterms. That's why this is happening. He knows he could lose the midterms, because these elections now in America, in the last 4 elections, they are knife-edge elections. And they have so much at stake. There's so much at stake now when in these elections. It could mean you're not going to get your health care. It could mean you don't have access to abortion. Well, that's what's happening. You know, you could have a state where you can't get the kind of health care that you want and have to try to go to another state, but they might not let you do that. I mean, it's really extraordinary, the high stakes of elections in America now.
Yeah.
And how close they are. So, you know, there is some hope, as Bruce points out. We don't want to hope that the economy goes south, but it's hurting. It's already hurting Americans, and they're feeling it. A lot of people that are Republicans do not like the one big beautiful bill. They don't like it at all. They know what's happening. So we have to wait and see how the wind blows, but we've got to get Americans out voting. And it used to be that Democrats had the numbers, but they don't have the numbers anymore. It used to be like in the 1960s, the people that recognized themselves as Democrats, like 51% of registered people were Democrats. I think now it's something like 32 or 33%. Most of them, there's been a big increase in independents. So it's about a third. Each party, Democrats, GOP, and now independents. But those independents have increased at the expense of the Democrats mainly. So that's not a good sign for Democrats going into this midterm or going into the next general election, that there aren't as many registered ones. And the Republicans are doing a really good job at the moment on registering people. They've registered a lot more Republicans in 2024 than they ever had before. So they're getting quite good at what the Democrats used to do. But there's a lot of good people in the Democrat Party, so we'll see who comes through.
Just one data point to keep in mind in the months ahead. Trump won the election with about 49.9% of the vote. His approval rating today is at 40 or below. 40% is his MAGA base. When you get below 40, that means you're losing some of your hardcore voters. And on the independents that Kim has talked about, yes, they are shifting. And so Trump approval at 38, 40, disapproval 54, 56, 57. That comes from those people unhappy with what he's not been able to deliver for them in the election.
Just to conclude, because we've got to wrap it up briefly, Kim's just given quite a detail about the sort of midterm in America domestically. Can we end with you on your midterm, really honest sense of what's going to happen in the world, Bruce?
Well, I fear for the worst. And because we don't have good leadership, I'm afraid that it could happen more easily than under other circumstances.
What could happen?
Well, you could have a land war in Europe. I mean, a real land war in Europe. You could have China, if China feels that it can actually do extremely aggressive things without counter from the United States, well, they may well do that. And then what world does Australia, how does Australia navigate those waters? And then economically,
with ghost submarines.
And economically, if tariffs cause trade wars, and the trade wars helped fuel the Depression in the 30s. So in other words, we don't know what the world is going to look like or the economy is going to look like next year, much less in 3 to 5 years. So this is a time for, as Kim says, leaders to stand up for the right reasons to tell the country the things we have to appreciate, and again, be proactive about our future instead of just waiting to see what the hell when you wake up at 6 in the morning, what the hell did he do last night? We've had enough of that.
Thank you both so much. It's been just brilliant to listen to you both and get your perspectives. And I want to thank you all for coming and being such a brilliant audience as always. I think we've got a little bar open tonight after this. I think someone thought some of us might need a drink. So please stay around if you'd like, get a copy of Bruce's book, get it signed, get a doomsday message written in it.
I do have one thing to say. For 9 years ago, I have an apology to make. 9 years ago, I was here. It was November before the election, or October 2016, and I said, Hillary Clinton is going to win the election. Every day since has been Yom Kippur for me.
That's what, never listen to anything he says. Well, I hope you're wrong again, Bruce. Let's hope, because it's getting,
the only way
getting more
God's
and more
gonna forgive me
dire,
for what
your
I did.
predictions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.